Process of creolization goes through different stages. We must also note that most pigeons arise as lingua francas. Some of these pigeons are used for a short time by people who are brought together for different purposes, maybe trade, business, political reasons, etc. And they develop a language to communicate with each other when they do not share a common language. But as soon as these people are done with their business, they separate, they stop using the pigeon, and gradually the pigeon dies. It is very few pigeons which develop into creoles. So it is only those pigeons which are continued to be used. The pigeons which continue to exist, only those pigeons change into creoles, because only then, when a pigeon has been in use for a long time, only then a point comes when some people start using it as their first language. When a creole continues to exist for a long time, it is possible in a situation where the speakers of the creole are in contact with the superstrate language, that is, the standard language from which the creole has derived. When the situation is such that the speakers of the creole are in contact with the speakers of the standard language, a creole continuum develops, which means that we look at the creole language as comprising different varieties. So the continuum has two extremes. On one extreme, we have the creole variety, which is closest to the standard language from which the creole has developed, and at the extreme end, we have the creole variety, which is very far from the standard language and sometimes is completely unintelligible to the speakers of the standard language. So we have these creole continuum which emerges when the creole remains in contact with the speakers of the standard language. So an English-based creole can develop a number of varieties when it is in contact with the standard language. So these varieties, of course, there will be two extremes of the continuum, and in between the two extremes, there will not be only one other variety in the middle, there will be many different varieties. As the number of these varieties increases, the influence of the standard language on the creole also increases, and it happens because of several social factors. Of course, the standard language is considered a symbol of power and prestige in the society, of being educated, belonging to the upper class. So there's a lot of pressure on the speakers of the creole language to adopt the standard language or show a preference for the standard language in their speech. So on this continuum, we have on one extreme we have people who show a preference for the standard language, and this influence of the standard language keeps increasing. This process of the increase of the standard language on the creole is called decreolization. So this creole continuum has different parts. As we have already said, the one extreme is the part of the continuum which is very close to the standard language from which it develops. This part is called acrolect, which is considered the high speech. It shows a clear leaning towards the standard language. It is the variety of the creole which is mostly used by the educated people. And if you look closely, there are very few differences between the acrolect and the standard language from which it develops. So, for example, if a creole is English-based, there will be very little difference between the creole and the standard English. Then we have basilect, which is considered the low speech, which is the other end of the continuum, the other extreme of the continuum. This speech, the speech of the basilect, is least comprehensible to the speakers of the standard language. It is very different from the standard language, and it is usually used by people who belong to, let's say, working class of the society. And then we have mesolect, which is the middle speech, which consists of the varieties which are in between the basilect and the acrolect. So these intermediate varieties are not very discrete. So we can't really say, name a particular variety and call it a mesolect. We see a blend of different varieties in the middle. Creole continuum arises under certain conditions only. It arises only when the two extreme varieties which are being used in a society are varieties of the same language. For example, if we look at a social continuum, let's say, and at one end we have people who speak the standard language, and at the other end we have people who speak a creole which does not derive from the standard language which is being used in that society. In that case, Creole continuum will not arise. Creole continuum will arise only when the two extremes are the extremes of the same language and not two different languages. When different languages involved, for example, one class of the society speaks one language, and the other class or other classes of the language speak other languages, such a situation is called diglossia and not. Or when people speak different languages at for different functions in a society, that's diglossia and not a Creole continuum. If there's no contact between the speakers of the standard language and speakers of the Creole, there'll be no Creole continuum. There'll be absolutely no Creole continuum. Creole continuum will arise only when there's a contact between the standard language and the Creole, and the standard language keeps influencing the Creole and different varieties of Creole keep emerging. Then there's something called hypercreolization. A stage comes during the development of Creole, or when people in a society in a large number use a Creole. A point comes when the speakers of the Creole show an aggressive reaction to the standard language, and they show this reaction to the standard language because they want to assert their identity, or perhaps they want to for example, they want to assert their ethnicity, or they are not really happy with the way their ethnicity is treated or looked at, etc. So people then start showing a lot of preference for the Creole, the pure form of the Creole, and shirk from using the standard language. And it is an aggressive reaction to the prestige which is attached to the standard language, and the status or the low status which is given to the Creole. This deliberate recreolization of the standard language then leads to, of course, an increase in the use of the Creole compared to the standard language. So it is the people who at one point had shown a preference for the standard language stop showing this preference and go back to the use of their Creole. And therefore it's called Recreolization. Here we have some samples from the continuum. The first three are the samples of the acrolect, that is the high speech, which is very close to the standard language, as you can see yourselves as well. 4 to 7 are the samples from mesolect, that is the middle speech, people of speech of the people who are between the two extremes, and 8 and 9 are the samples from the speech of working class, rural people, or completely uneducated people who speak an English Creole. So 8 and 9 are very different from 1, 2, and 3, as you can see for yourself, and they may not even be comprehensible or intelligible to the speaker of a standard language. So we see that the process of creolization goes through different stages. We start with creolization, then a point comes when decreolization of the language takes place, and finally recreolization takes place.